Today's Sober Friends podcast is brought to you by Pete B. Pete B is our pal you heard over the last 2 weeks. And we didn't make him do this, but he decided he was going to buy us 5 coffees. This is what Pete said. The show rocks. Rock on, you guys. I'm really loving the new way to connect. Awesome platform for service you've developed here. So for a guy with Pete's sobriety, which is a lot, and the fact that an old timer like him is into the new way of communicating with people, it means a lot. Pete, you didn't have to do that. And I'm very grateful that you bought us 5 coffees. If you think it's important to spread the word like Pete B did to the newcomer, that recovery is possible, consider buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. I think about nights like tonight. Why do we do this? All right, I didn't make the whole meal. I went and bought 2 roaster chickens, but I made from scratch mashed potatoes and I made a nice salad. I had just enough time to serve everybody dinner and then run down here. So I'm going to have my dinner later. So I look and say, why do I do this for you people? Are you even grateful for all of the great content I give? You should be on your knees thanking me. No. It's a transition to say, why do we do this?
It's for all the glory.
It's for all the glory.
Right.
Why do we do this? Why do we do this each week on this
groupies.
podcast? What's that?
It's for the groupies.
For the groupies are amazing,
Peer pressure, guilt,
right?
like the old
It's
Italian grandma.
It's to spread the message.
Yeah.
It's to connect with people like Pete last week, who has got lots of sobriety and is open to new ways of doing this. It's for the people on Instagram who may not know AA or may not know recovery. It's for somebody new who might be thinking about putting down the drink. So I think our subtitle is, I am responsible. I'm responsible for spreading the message. And Steve, in the context of doing this show, how are you responsible? Why do you show up week after week?
You know, I was thinking about that. I was on a retreat this past weekend, which is what got me thinking about this. And the retreat I goes on has 2 different themes based upon 2 different groups. And one of them is I am responsible. And there's a pledge out there, an AA pledge, that says I am responsible anytime, anywhere. When someone reaches out their hand for help, I want the hand of AA to always be there, and for that I am responsible. So I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about why I do this podcast and why I do what I do. And basically it's because, you know, I tell part of my story that the biggest thing that happened to me when I came into recovery, and for me it was a 12-step program, was AA, is that somebody who I did not know, a stranger, reached out his hand and said, hey, my name Mike, how are you doing tonight? And that connected me in a way that I was never connected before. And if that person didn't do that, maybe somebody else would have, but that person was, you know, unique in my recovery. And there was nothing that person wanted. He wasn't asking me for anything. He wasn't expecting anything else from me. He was just trying to pass this message on. So I do this because I want to try to do that in light of what he did for me and what others have done for me to the next person who may need help.
It's an interesting thing that you just said there, that he didn't expect anything in return. Do you think Mike gets something in return for helping you?
Oh, I think in the long run, sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that I just know today. I know this because I've reached out and helped other alcoholics, or they've reached out to me and I've agreed to help them. Is that I say it all the time. My program of sobriety is never better than when I'm working actively with another alcoholic. Never. It's always stronger. It's always brighter. It's always full of colors. It's full of new information. I read the same thing I read over and over and over, and I get new information from it. I mean, it really is incredible. A couple of years ago, during the pandemic, I was working with 2 alcoholics. We were meeting at my house. I was meeting with alcoholics 2 or 3 times a week. And I just remember how I felt during that time. Like my program was on fire. And it came at the perfect time for me, because that was the time when there weren't a lot of there were very few. There were some, but very few face-to-face meetings. And I was really cautious with the pandemic and all. But I let these 2 guys come into my house long before there was vaccinations. We didn't wear masks because I didn't want to do that, and we just rolled the dice on it. And listen, it was really good. So yeah, you do get something out of it. And today I realize, but I don't expect anything. I don't expect my anybody that I help to do anything. I don't even expect them to stay sober. I mean that honestly. Like, I don't even expect them to stay sober today. I hope they will, but that's not an expectation from me anymore.
Well, that's interesting. Lack of expecting something back. That's not how things work in society. John, what keeps you coming back each week to do this podcast, and how are you responsible?
And that's a great question. I've been doing this a long time. It's the only organization or only group or only thing that I've ever done and stuck with. Typically, my MO is I would start something and I'd get advanced into it, or I'd get to that point where I start to master and it loses its sparkle and I have to go on and do something. I try something else. And I don't know why. I think the way I look at it, or what my belief is, I'm in a constant state of recovery. This isn't something I'm ever going to recover from. And my mental well-being, my peace, my serenity is all proportional to the amount of contact I have with other travelers, other alcoholic addicts. Doesn't matter. We're all the same. And this is just something that I've been doing. I mean, there was pretty much ever since you started the podcast, it came on. I did. I told my story at the early stages.
You guys have been here from the beginning in one way or another,
right? And I think both Steve and I, we told you if you need any help, we're here, willing to help. The only way that we're going to survive as a group, and I'm talking recovery, is if we all stick together and we all help each other out. Because the minute we stop helping each other, we start to lose our numbers, we start to lose our strength, we start to lose that hope of recovery, that feeling of well-being, that everything's going to be okay. After 32 and a half some years, sometimes it is a struggle for me to keep going on some of these things. It doesn't matter whether it's retreats or going to meetings or doing the podcast. It's like, sometimes I just want to take a break, and I remember that when I take breaks from recovery, my peace of mind goes down the shitter very, very fast. I turn into the old John that's negative, that's nasty, that's short, that takes things out on people. So this has become part of my program, part of my recovery, because as long as I keep doing what I'm doing, everything's going to be okay. Here we are coming up on, we're last week of October. Joe and Charlie Big Book season's around the corner.
Great.
I'm excited about that, trying to get that up and running. We have a little logistical issues coming, how we're going to pull this off this year, because we have my aunts living with us now. But, it's just part of what I do. And to Steve's point, when I help someone personally, a sponsee, for instance, it's like you said about Mike. I expect absolutely nothing in return because it was given to me. I learned all the stuff that I learned from other people. I didn't study in a book. I didn't go to school for this. I learned it from other people having the wanting to give that gift of recovery back, and want to see somebody else that was sick and suffering and no longer have to live that way. And by doing that, I feel better. Just by going over somebody's house and reading pages out of the big book, explaining what it all means, going through those steps one at a time, answering the questions, trying to explain what this stuff all means, you walk out of there, you're not even on the ground anymore. You're floating. And, knowing that, we're here, once a week, we bring on a guest occasionally. We talk about a lot of different things. And knowing that we have the possibility of reaching tens of thousands of people. And the thought that maybe we help just one person makes it all worthwhile. We may never know if we're helping anybody, but it's that hope that that the message that we try to carry is one of recovery, and that life in recovery is better than the life in alcohol or drug addiction than it ever possibly could be. My best day loaded was my worst day sober is far better than my best day loaded. Because I'm feeling things, I understand things, I learn things. When I was out there, I was just stuffing everything away and drowning it away and trying to forget about it.
I think I'm going to do a solo podcast about my college reunion that I went to a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to do that because it's part of my recovery story. And when I was at this reunion, there were things I recognized. And I recognized that the people, I went to this reunion, one, because I was sober. I never would have thought of doing it and driving. It said 2 hours on Waves. It ended up being like closer to 3 because you run into traffic on the Merritt and on 95. And there were people who I wanted to see who turned out to live closer to me than this college, but this is how we have to see each other. And I wanted to see these people. And there was booze there, but booze wasn't an issue. As a matter of fact, it was a benefit to me that I didn't have to drink because I could be present and I could see these people and I could ask them about them. We ended up going to the bar/tavern that we used to hang out at, which has food. So you can get dinner in the back. And I realized being in this place, I used to love it because you could get a real glass. This was the one bar where you get a real glass for beer. So I felt like an adult. And looking around, the college has, it was a dump. It was grimy when we went. And I look around and I'm like, they would never let a flea bag like me into this place now. It's gorgeous now, how they've reinvented everything in 25 years. This bar hasn't changed at all. Sure, they've swapped out some tables. Some of the decorations on the wall are different, but you walk in there and it's like, this is the one place that isn't a damn bit different. The bathroom still is not handicap accessible and is still disgusting. Smells the same as the day I was in college. Probably has not been cleaned since then. But being around them, I'm realizing as everybody's having drinks and I'm not, I'm looking around. I'm like, it wasn't the booze. Where the real fun was, it wasn't the booze. It was these people I was around. And I was in a bar that had booze, and I didn't want booze at all because I was dialed into everybody else. And I went off with different friend groups in college trying to chase something, not realizing that these were the people who were my real friends, who I kept running away from. And they brought that. I was thinking about that because, John, you mentioned about I give up on everything except AA. But there were some things in college that we talked about. She's like, how did you ever pledge a fraternity? And I said, well, my friends did it, but they dropped out. I go, yeah, I didn't know I had that option. So there is something in me that sticks around with it. I went off that journey because some of these stories are things I like to do to help others. And it's part of my story. And I've really had to just get this in my head for a couple weeks now of what it meant to be. It is not always easy putting together a podcast. If you're ever thinking about putting together a podcast, I do recommend Ryan's podcast. What's it called again? Ryan M., who was on this several episodes ago, The Stolen Goods. He ended up posting something like, hey, I'm going to do some different things with this podcast. He's realizing, oh my God, this is kind of hard to do. It's hard to put this together and think about what we're going to talk about and sound coherent and do it remotely and then edit it so you get rid of all of the nonsense that you don't want to hear in here and put it out and make people have a message. There's a lot more time I could do for other stuff. But this combines for me my creativity, the fact I have the equipment, and my passion for recovery and doing something that's beneficial. And getting those emails from time to time or Instagram messages where somebody feels helped, it's baffling to me. It's just like, wow, somebody actually is listening to this and getting something out of it.
One of the things that happened to me, Matt, as I was going through, I became fascinated, which is the way it's supposed to work, with TikTok. To the point where I removed it from my phone because my wife said, you should try going a week without looking at TikTok. And I'd be better off just taking it right off my phone. So I got playing with Instagram, and I was looking at some of your stuff, and I have never done a lot on Instagram. But here's what struck me, and this is what happens, right? Is I get inspired by someone else. So I'm looking at you, and you're out there on Instagram, trying to put the message out there about this podcast and about recovery, and you push a lot of recovery, other people out there, right? You just push a lot of stuff, but you're out there, your picture's out there, your person's out there. And I think about how in my recovery, I have been on a need to know basis about my recovery for my whole recovery. If you don't need to know the details, I don't want you to know the details. I don't talk about it openly on any social media or anything like that. And that has changed. Literally, it slowly has changed for me. And before I went on retreat, the weekend before, not last weekend, weekend before, I had a family reunion that I went to, which was like yours. It was some drinking, not a lot of drinking, but there was a cash bar there, and some people certainly drank. And then after that, we had a block party in the neighborhood. And I came home for that block party, and one of my neighbors, a young guy who's fairly new to the neighborhood, who I see, and I was one of the first persons he met, we get talking, and he says, "Hey, Steve, do you want an adult?" He always called it, "Do you want an adult beverage?" And I finally said to him, I didn't say to him because there was a group of people around, I'm alcohol free. And he looks at me and goes, "Holy shit, I didn't know that." And he goes, "And every time I see you, I offer you a drink." And I'm like, that's fine. So anyway, before I go out on my retreat, there's a woman across the street who has a young child, and I had my grandson over, and we were talking, and I told her I was going on retreat. And she said, "Oh, is it a lead retreat?" And I said to her, "Oh, it's a recovery retreat. I'm in recovery, and I'm going on a AA retreat with some men." And I would have never done that before. I would have never shared that with a neighbor across the street because and now today I feel, well, this woman happens to be associated with the church. She's a ordained minister. And maybe there might be somebody that she knows who might need help. And maybe someday, and I'm very friendly with her and her husband, maybe she might come up to me and say, "Hey, I know somebody might need help. Can you help them?" Right? I want to be available for that person. And I cannot be available for that person unless other people know. So I have finally reached this point in my sobriety and in my recovery where I'm more apt to let other people know so that I could be more helpful to more people.
I'm kind of in the middle. I like you, Steve, when we first started this thing, there was no way in God's creating earth I was going to come out publicly, and that kind of all changed, when Kelly came on that first time. I was going to the same gym as Kelly, and somebody said something about, I think Kelly had said that she was X amount of days sober, and somebody else came up and said something, and Kelly looked at me and she goes, "What about you?" And I think that was 31 years at the time. I said, "About 31 years." And everybody in the room that was still there, their mouths drop open, and it's like, how can you possibly get
right
that much time?
31 years.
And they never knew it. And
a lot of weekends.
A lot of weekends. And I never, and it didn't feel bad. I got sober a long time ago where where anonymity was, man, you don't tell anybody anything because they're going to hold it against you. Things have changed significantly in the last 5 years. Where I used to live across the river, this young couple moved in, and they were going to have some shindig in their backyard, and they invited us over. I said, thanks. We're really not into the drinking scene. So, neither we are. Mel and I are in recovery. And it's like, really? Okay. So am I. They broke the ice, but these I'm gonna use the term younger people because that's being 64 years old. They are younger people. Makes me feel old, but they have no problem at all of saying, I'm sober. Or, I haven't heard anybody use the term alcohol free a lot, but I have heard it. The biggest thing is, I'm sober. I don't drink and I don't do drugs anymore. Or they don't even put the anymore in there. They just don't for whatever reason. And they're not shy about it. It's almost like they're not advertising. I mean, they're very proud of it, and as we all should be. I mean, this is a abnormal thing for people like us to be, is sober.
Yes.
And it's tough.
And to be successful at it.
Yeah, and to keep on putting day after day after day after day and resisting that temptation, resisting the case of the fuck it's, because we all get them, and reaching out to the other person, and asking for some help, or just bonding with one of our fellow travelers. I'm not there where I still can't. For me to put out on Facebook or Instagram, come this February that I've been, then when I get to, February 14th and it's 33 years, there's no way I can put that out there because for me, that's my ego talking. Because look at me, look at me, look at me, look what I've done, look how good I am. I'm a recovery god. That's what I think. So I don't broadcast that on a lot of times. I don't say it at meetings. We do it at retreats because we have to tell what our sobriety date is. There's certain times that we do it. When I speak, I tell my sobriety date, and I usually will go and tell it in, years and months or in days, particularly at a rehab center, because it gets their attention that this thing is possible to do. If you think that, you're in this rehab and you've been here for 2 weeks and it's like, oh man, how is this guy getting sober for 30 days or 2 months or 3 years? A year? Yeah, you're full of it. So, I start off with that because they have to know that this stuff works. And they got to see the living proof, whether it's we're doing it on the podcast, that there are people out there that have been successful with this recovery thing for a long time, longer than me. I mean, look at Pete, 40 something years. My grand sponsor, 44, 45 years. I mean, these numbers are staggering. There's a guy at the retreat with over 50 years. It is possible as long as we help each other. And this is a method of helping us, of helping others. We have this platform that we can get this message out, and that's what we're supposed to do.
I think there's something in there around intent as well. So our
Yes.
buddy Howard, who does the AA recovery interviews, which is an excellent podcast to listen to, Howard is very focused on anonymity. He is by the book. He's not going to tell you his last name. He's not going to tell you his guest's last name. And he removes anything that might tell you who they are, where they came from. He is by the book with the traditions. That's great. Mm-hmm. I think if you're going to go public with who you are, you have to, it better be for the right intent. What's the reason? Are you looking for an ego stroke? Are you looking to get a pat on the back? All right, that's the wrong reason. Because if you're in recovery and you're out there, you have to walk the walk, and there's an extra pressure to stay sober. Because if you're out there and you relapse, then others can look and say, see, it doesn't work. They're full of crap.
And that's what scares me the most. That bottom line is, coming out and saying, this is what I'm doing. And this is, I've quit drinking, I'm sober, I go to AA, and then I relapse. That just puts a tarnish on it. And it scares me.
I think, John, you were talking about how, the younger people seem to be more open with this. And I think that's true. I do. I think that's true. First of all, because they've been on social media their whole lives, or a better portion of their lives. So they're used to this stuff. But also, the understanding of addiction has changed too. And I do think there's less of a risk today that if you fail or if you struggle with recovery, that people say that good intent people who really understand addiction are going to say, oh, recovery or this doesn't work. I think there's less of those people out there. I think what they'll say is, oh, this person maybe cannot get sober, right? They cannot stay clean. I think you hear that more than you hear, oh, AA doesn't work, except by people who probably need this program.
I agree.
And are looking for an excuse of why they don't want to do AA, right? Those people will say, see, AA doesn't work, therefore I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So, but here's the other problem, and I don't want to turn this podcast into an anonymity podcast, but the other thing I've always thought about is I have to be careful about outing myself, because sometimes that brings other people out with me.
Yes.
And some people all of a sudden become associated with me, and people start saying, oh, look at this, that person, I wonder if that person is in recovery. So I'm very conscious of that. I'm very conscious of being careful how I out myself, so that somebody else doesn't get outed.
There are old timers out there who don't like this type of stuff specifically for that reason. And there are good reasons for it. I think there's also a good so I'm more public than I am out of necessity to try and get the show in other people's ears. There is a reality that you have to use social media for marketing purposes. So it's a reality. And I will tell you, social media for me is a grind. I don't enjoy doing it as much as I like doing this. So I really have to work at it. And it's the first thing that's very easy for me to put off. There is also something to be said with putting a name with a face that you can identify with. Dax Shepard's podcast, where he talked about being 6 or 7 days clean after saying he was sober for years and years and years, and he wasn't, is an important podcast for people either in recovery to hear or people who are thinking about getting sober, because it was very honest.
Oh, it was, yeah. And I just want to talk to you because my daughter told me about that, because my daughter listened to that podcast faithfully, and she told me about that when I was listening to it too, and she asked me, say, hey, did you listen to that? If you are in recovery and you have not listened to that episode, I highly recommend that episode for you. He talks about what a schmuck he felt like after his relapse, and it was really, really good. So anyway, I highly recommend that.
Yeah, it's important to hear those stories. And if it's just some anonymous person, you don't connect with it. You talked about your addiction to TikTok earlier, but TikTok is a reality, and it is how people communicate, to the point that on YouTube, the fastest growing segment now of YouTube are YouTube Shorts, a ripoff of what TikTok is doing.
Yeah.
My kids watch that more than they watch regular shows.
Yeah. Now, TikTok has taken over. So, I mean, it's where everything. So is Reels on Facebook, right? So there's a lot of people are trying to emanate what TikTok is doing because it's been so successful. And like I said, and listen, it's made to suck you in and do what it did for me and everybody else. Right. Sit there and mindlessly watch these 1 to 3 minute videos for an hour and a half, right? But you're losing time. Like, it's made to do that. So, but again,
you can turn it into good. If
you can, and there's some good stuff on there that I loved, and I mean, and if I could just sort of figure that out, then I could. But you get sucked into the other stuff, which is how it's supposed to work. But so anyway, on this retreat I went to, there was a 24-year-old who has just come out of recovery, out of some time in a recovery program, and it was just really interesting to sit there. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing something like a retreat, is that there was guys there on that retreat who had, just like we talked about, 36 years, and this guy who was 24 years old, his father and this is the interesting thing, his father and his grandfather were sort of, his father definitely was part of the program, and it sounded like his grandfather maybe was or should have been. And it's just amazing, right? So I look at this kid, certainly his father, maybe my age, maybe even younger, and then his grandfather's probably my age, right? And then this kid is still on this retreat, and it was just really nice to be with someone that fresh. And again, one of the reasons why I do this stuff, and one of the reasons why I do this retreat, and this retreat that I'm doing next year, I've taken on the responsibility of organizing it and running it. Which again, it's like, why do I do that? There's 20 guys, 25 guys going through that. It's a lot of work. You got to chase people for money. It's like, it's a lot of stuff. But I do it because maybe I help somebody and I know I'll get something out of it. That's why I continue to do all of this stuff.
I think the key here is having the right expectations and having the right mindset. Expect nothing. And when you work with somebody and you expect nothing, you're likely to get something back, even if it's you feel better. I think it's time to ask you to do something, which is communicate with us. What do you do in recovery that helps you? How do you spread the message? How are you living the example in your own way? I'd also love for you to go to Apple and give us a 5-star review. Go to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. SoberFriendsPod.com is the website. At SoberFriendsPod on Instagram, you can connect with the show. We love hearing that you're listening and this is helpful. John and Steve, thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Great to be back, Matt.
Yeah,
Cool
and
beans, man.
We'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod.